It appeared suddenly like a shadow fallen from a distant, silent space that had slipped onto the pages of astronomers' catalogues. Its name is 3I divided by Atlas, the third interstellar object to have visited our system. But even before its numbers and symbols were entered into databases, it already existed in the human mind as something else, as a sign, as a whisper from the depths of the universe, as if time itself had decided to remind us of its own infinite mystery. The sky, that eternal screen, rarely surprises us to such an extent. The stars are predictable in their slow choreography. Planets obediently follow their orbits, submitting to the laws of Kepler. But sometimes, the sky trembles. Sometimes, it opens a loophole through which a wanderer bursts forth, belonging neither to the sun nor to familiar trajectories. This is always a shock, not because astronomers do not expect visitors, but because the cosmos rarely allows us to see outsiders so closely. 3I divided by Atlas is not just a piece of rock or ice. It is a symbol of the very question humanity has asked itself for millennia. What is out there, beyond our reach? Its trajectory is a sign from the outside, its shape, a riddle that we, despite telescopes, calculations, and entire libraries of knowledge, still cannot precisely determine. It seems to be hidden in its own radiance, in its own distortion, and this fact makes it dangerously beautiful. There is a special drama in such discoveries. When an object first flashes in the raw data from a telescope, no one knows exactly what has been found. At first, it is noise, then numbers, then a trajectory that scientists begin to compare with thousands of known comets and asteroids. But in the case of Atlas, everything was different from the very beginning. Its path seemed too sharp, its form too strange. And at that moment, the scientists felt a chill. They realized they were once again facing something that extended beyond the boundaries of the familiar. The world had already experienced the effect of Oumuamua, the first interstellar wanderer that sped through the solar system and left behind more questions than answers. And now that the third had appeared, the memory of that shock was revived. But Atlas turned out to be different. Its contours seemed to dissolve during observations. Some saw a comet, others an asteroid, and a third group saw a hint of something else entirely. It appeared and then immediately hid in the twilight of doubt, as if the cosmos itself were playing a game with humanity, showing a piece of the truth and then instantly concealing it behind a curtain. 3I divided by Atlas became a new mirror of the unknown, and this mirror reflected not so much its own outlines, but our own fears, hopes, and conjectures. From the moment the object entered the field of view of the telescopes, its story ceased to belong only to astronomers. It became part of humanity's myth. The myth that not everything can be measured. The myth that the universe knows how to keep secrets better than any civilization. And perhaps the myth that we are not alone. And so, the shadow of the interstellar wanderer stretched over the scientific world. Too fast to hold, too distant to decipher, but already too close to forget. It always begins quietly, not with applause, not with sensational cries, but with the soft rustle of numbers on a screen, with wandering points in the night sky. Telescopes record them every night, thousands of tiny signals, reflections, and optical artifacts. Most are erased in the flow of information, like raindrops disappearing on the surface of an ocean. But sometimes, amidst this chaos, something is born that holds an operator's gaze just a little longer than usual. This is exactly how 3I divided by Atlas was first noticed. There was no fanfare, only a small discrepancy in the data that caught the attention of an automatic analysis program. At first, it seemed to be just noise, a defect, or a false alarm. But then the algorithms, trained to distinguish random fluctuations from real celestial bodies, pointed to the stability of the signal. What had flared up in the depths of the catalogue did not disappear. It repeated, and it moved. Scientists know this moment, when something alien first breaks out from the statistics, when graphs begin to pulse, and trajectories form patterns that are impossible to ignore. So it was here the object revealed itself not as a local wanderer of the solar system, but as an alien, whose trajectory did not fit into the familiar laws of celestial mechanics. In these seconds, astronomers are always on the border of excitement and caution. An error is possible. Too many times, the data has deceived them. But with each new observation, with each passing day, with each nightly series of frames, it became clear, this is not a mistake, this is not noise, this is a signal. Signal, a word that sounds ambiguous. For a scientist, it means a confirmed observation, pure information, but for a poet, it means a call, a message, a letter from afar. And in the case of Atlas, both meanings proved to be true. For the first time in human history, this object was seen as a light pulse, a flash on a digital image that came from the abyss of interstellar space. This flash gave birth not only to lines of numbers, but also to a tremor. Behind it lay a possibility. We are again witnessing the arrival of a foreign body from beyond the solar system. We are again participants in a very rare event. But along with this thrill, fear was also born. For even then, in that initial data, there was a sense of strangeness. Too sharp an angle, too indistinct parameters, too many questions at the very beginning of the journey. The scientific world lives for moments when chaos turns into order and chance into discovery. But this order was fragile. In the first flash of data, there was already a hint that Atlas would not become a simple addition to the list of interstellar bodies. It would become a challenge. And this was only the beginning. In April of 2020, the world was focused on terrestrial fears and anxieties. But at that very moment, as cities emptied and people confined themselves to their homes, the heavens continued their eternal motion. And there, in the mountains of Hawaii, the Atlas system, the automated asteroid terrestrial impact last alert system, was at work. Its task is simple and ruthless: to search for potential threats, those celestial rocks that could fall to Earth, bringing catastrophe. It was Atlas that became the eye that first caught the presence of the new interstellar wanderer. This is ironic. A system created as a guardian to protect the planet from dangers accidentally discovered an object in the heavens that challenged not so much our security, but our understanding of the universe. That evening, the telescope recorded a faint point that at first did not stand out in any particular way, but when comparing successive frames, it became clear that it was moving too fast. It was not just gliding among the stars like an ordinary asteroid. It was tearing through space with a trajectory that does not belong to the Sunday. Scientists, after checking the calculations, understood that they were facing another interstellar wanderer. After Oumuamua and Borisov, this was only the third such case in the history of observations. The probability of such a quick repetition seemed negligible, almost impossible. But the cosmos does not count probabilities. It simply casts its gifts and riddles into our brief century. And so, a new name appeared in the catalogues: 3I divided by Atlas. 3I for the third interstellar object, Atlas, in honor of the very system that noticed it. It seemed like a dry designation, but behind it hid a whole universe of questions. What does it look like? Where did it come from? And most strangely, why does its shape remain hidden even from the sharpest eyes of telescopes? If Borisov showed its cometary nature, and Oumuamua surprised with its cigar or disc shape, then Atlas seemed to dissolve into its own data. The images were hazy, the photometry contradictory, and the conclusions fragile. For many, this became a symbol, as if the universe itself had decided to play a joke. You are searching for clarity, so you shall receive a mystery. Will you be able to see what is hidden, not behind the clouds, but beyond the limits of understanding? The discovery of Atlas became not just a new fact in astronomy, it became a new page in the history of human humility before the cosmos. For we once again found ourselves in the role of children, looking at a strange reflection in a mirror and not understanding whether it belongs to us or to something alien. And while crises raged on Earth, a story unfolded in the heavens that quietly changed our view of the interstellar. When astronomers finally confirmed that the object had indeed arrived from interstellar space, a feeling arose, as if a door to a house, long locked and bolted, had suddenly been pushed ajar, and an uninvited guest had peered inside. No one had called for it, no one had expected it, but it appeared, unceremoniously, reminding us that the solar system is not a fortress, but merely a crossroads in the endless movement of matter and energy. 3I divided by Atlas turned out to be that very stranger whom everyone dreams of and fears at the same time. On one hand, interstellar objects are messengers from distant worlds. They carry information about places we will never reach. On the other hand, they disrupt the sense of comfort and order. For each such wanderer demonstrates, the borders of our system are permeable, and beyond these borders lies an infinity filled with bodies whose forces we do not control. The trajectory of Atlas confirmed its foreignness. It did not coincide with any known orbit, nor with any familiar family of bodies. It flew in too fast, too straight, as if following its own unearthly laws. This object did not revolve around the Sunday. It was a guest, and its path was merely a visit, short, cold, but inevitably mysterious. An unexpected guest always makes the hosts wonder what it brings with it, how it might be dangerous, and most tormentingly, why it has come. The question, why, has no meaning in strict astronomy, where rocks and ice move only under the influence of forces. But for the human mind, this question always arises, because it is addressed not to science, but to myth, to our eternal search for meaning. The image of the interstellar wanderer in culture is always colored with duality. It simultaneously beckons and frightens. It is like a guest from a dream who disrupts the usual rhythm and disappears, leaving only a vague memory behind. And Atlas instantly fit into this archetype. Too little data, too much imagination. It was an invitation to conjecture, to theories, to philosophical reflections. Astronomers knew there was little time. The object was moving, and soon it would disappear into the abyss. They had to catch every photon, every reflection, every moment of its presence. And the more they tried to capture it, the more it slipped away. Its brightness changed. Its shape defied calculation. Its signals contradicted each other. This happens with guests who come not to be understood, but to remind us that the world is larger than it seems. And in this unexpected encounter with Atlas, humanity once again felt that the cosmos is not just an environment for research. It is a mirror in which we see our own ignorance, our own thirst for meaning, and our own fear of the unknown. The trajectory of 3I divided by Atlas was calculated quickly, but each new series of observations only intensified the sense of strangeness. According to all the laws of celestial mechanics, an interstellar object should have moved predictably. A free flight under the influence of the sun's and planets' gravity, a smooth arc, the strict geometry of an orbit. But Atlas seemed to resist this simplicity. Its path looked jagged, cold, like a trail left by something not entirely material. Its speed turned out to be too high, its angle of entry too sharp, and the object's brightness changed as if it were not a solid body. Observers recorded flashes, darkened intervals, and sharp fluctuations in brightness. All this resembled a play of light and shadow on an uneven surface. But the longer they looked, the more they understood that the surface of Atlas did not fit any familiar model. A cold trail remained not only in the telescope data, but it also settled within the scientists themselves. For behind each set of numbers stood a question. Why is this object so different from the two previous interstellar visitors? Oumuamua surprised with its shape and acceleration. Borisov revealed itself as a typical comet, but Atlas seemed to deliberately hide its nature. Some astronomers compared it to a comet disintegrating under the influence of solar heat. Others saw in it an asteroid covered with reflective crystals. But these hypotheses lacked coherence. The data slipped away like ice in one's hands. In the reports, words like anomaly, uncertainty, and instability appeared. These are all signs of an object that refuses to fit into a frame. It left a cold trail not only in the heavens, but also in the human consciousness. A trail that does not warm with knowledge, but chills with mystery. And the farther Atlas moved from Earth, the clearer it became. We may never know the whole truth. Its path was too brief, its image too blurry. And yet, it was this cold trail that turned it into a symbol, a sign that the cosmos always reserves the right to a secret. For in the end, the true mystery is not in the shape of the body itself, but in why we so desperately want to solve it. When laboratories around the world began to collect data on 3I divided by Atlas, the first thing that caught the eye was its movement. The laws of celestial mechanics are simple and stern. Bodies obey gravity, and their path can be calculated with cold precision. Even interstellar objects coming from outside must follow these rules. Their orbits are open hyperbolas, their trajectories, the strict equations of Newton and Einstein. But Atlas seemed to resist. Its movement appeared fractured, contradictory. Each new observation introduced corrections, and these corrections did not form a coherent picture. It seemed to glide past the usual formulas, not violating them directly, but playing on the edge of what is permissible, leaving scientists in bewilderment. In astronomy, such cases are frightening because if an object does not fit into known laws, there are two possibilities. Either the data is flawed, or nature itself is posing a challenge. Flawed data is often explained by bad weather, technical noise, or imperfect calibrations, but Atlas was observed from different telescopes, at different latitudes, and at different times, and still its path seemed wrong. The fluctuations in its speed were particularly alarming. It seemed that the body would slightly accelerate, then slow down, as if forces other than gravity were acting upon it. Similar effects can be explained by gas emissions from comets, but Atlas did not show the expected signs of a tail. Ice would have evaporated noticeably, but here there was emptiness. Only a subtle hint, as if slipping out of view. And in this elusiveness, there was something frightening, for it reminded us that our knowledge is fragile. We pride ourselves on Newton's laws and Einstein's equations, but one small body can call into question the completeness of our worldview. Scientists argued whether this could be a simple optical illusion or if a force vector was hidden in the object's very structure, in its strange shape that reflects sunlight and heat in such a way that the trajectory appears distorted. There were no answers. And in these questions, a quiet fear arose, because Atlas seemed to be telling us, your laws are not the limit, your formulas are only an approximation. There are realms where they no longer work as you think, and this feeling did not leave anyone who followed its movement. It flew as if it were apart from the rules, and by this, it reminded us that the cosmos is not an archive of formulas, but a living mystery that cannot be definitively captured. Each interstellar wanderer carries within it a unique imprint of its origin, a shape, a composition, a surface texture. It was the object's geometry that was supposed to be the key to unlocking its nature, but in the case of 3I divided by Atlas, the geometry was elusive. It seemed to dissolve into the darkness, hiding beyond the resolution of telescopes, leaving only hints instead of outlines. The photometric data obtained in the first weeks of observation did not provide a coherent picture. The magnitude of its brightness fluctuated as if the body were rotating, changing its orientation relative to Earth. But the fluctuations did not fit a simple model of a rotating sphere or an elongated cylinder. The periods were erratic, the phases shifted, and the brightness did not follow the expected patterns. Scientists began to build hypotheses. Some believed that Atlas was a fragment of a disintegrated comet or planetesimal, its surface chaotically reflecting light. Others spoke of a complex, irregular shape. Perhaps it was an object resembling a pile of rubble, held together by time. But the more data that came in, the clearer it became. No familiar geometry could explain the observed effects. Instead of a shape, researchers were left with shadows, photon noise, fluctuating light curves, and blurry images taken through the thick layer of Earth's atmosphere. It seemed as if the very nature of Atlas was deliberately hiding, as if an invisible curtain were guarding its secret. In astronomy, there is an expression, to see the invisible. It describes moments when scientists draw conclusions not from direct observations, but from consequences, from hints, from voids. With Atlas, this expression took on a new meaning, because its geometry seemed to have been erased from our instruments, leaving only room for conjecture. And here, a philosophical thought arises. Perhaps invisibility is also a form. Perhaps the elusive nature of Atlas itself is its essence. Like a shadow that cannot be caught, it becomes a mirror for our expectations and fears. The geometry of the invisible is not only an astronomical puzzle, it is a reminder that the universe can be not only open, but also closed, and that a secret may lie not in what is hidden beyond sight, but in what is never meant to be seen. When the first reports on 3I divided by Atlas began to circulate through scientific journals and conferences, the main question sounded surprisingly simple and yet hopelessly complex. What is the shape of this object? For an astronomer, shape is not an aesthetic detail, it is a key to understanding origin. Spherical bodies are born in gravitational embraces, while elongated, cigar-shaped ones are the result of collisions and destruction. Chaotic and angular shapes are the children of random catastrophes in distant systems. Shape is the biography of a celestial wanderer, written in rock and ice. With Atlas, this biography seemed to have been erased. Each new series of observations, instead of providing answers, brought new contradictions. The fluctuations in brightness hinted at rotation, but their rhythm did not match simple models. If it were cigar-shaped, as was suggested for Oumuamua, then the light curve would have had a clear, repeating pattern. But here, the pattern was fragmented, as if a geometry that defied conventional categories was hidden behind it. Some scientists put forward a hypothesis. Atlas could be a fragment of a disintegrated comet, possessing a surface of a complex, asymmetrical shape. Others hinted at the possibility of a rubble pile, a body that is not solid but assembled from many smaller parts held together by weak forces. Such a structure could explain the variability in brightness, but it did not explain the strangeness of its trajectory. The shape remained a question, and with it, something more. For it was here, in this simple question, that the boldest conjectures were born. If the body does not resemble the asteroids and comets known to us, could it be entirely non-natural? Could this strangeness be a sign of artificial origin? Most astronomers rejected such an idea, considering it to be without evidence. But the very posing of the question reflected the tension. For each observation of Atlas seemed to push towards the idea that its shape was deliberately hidden, that the object was not just eluding understanding, but was actively hiding. And it was this hidden element that made its mystery frightening, because the question of shape, in the case of Atlas, ceased to be purely astronomical. It became a philosophical question. What are we willing to accept as truth, and what are we willing to acknowledge as possible? When the light of the sun touched the surface of 3I divided by Atlas, it turned into a riddle. What should have brought clarity only added more fog. Light, usually a faithful guide for astronomers, this time became a deceiver. Photometric observations revealed oddities that could not be reduced to any single model of a reflecting body. On some nights, Atlas shone brighter than could be expected from an object of its supposed size. On others, it almost dissolved, as if its surface suddenly absorbed light. And this happened too abruptly to be explained by ordinary rotation or the evaporation of material. Spectral analysis also provided no comfort. Where scientists expected to see lines characteristic of water or carbon, they found blurred contours and hints, too indefinite for final conclusions. Some groups claimed there was ice on the surface of Atlas, while others insisted on dry rock, but neither version became convincing. The most alarming thing was that the object's light behaved as if it were being distorted, reflecting not from a solid surface, but from something inconsistent, from a cloud of debris, from a fragmented structure, or from a material whose properties are entirely unknown to us. Scientists tried to find parallels in the behavior of other bodies in the solar system, but there were almost no analogies. Even unstable comets, disintegrating near the sun, did not produce such a deceptive pattern of brightness. It seemed as if Atlas was deliberately playing with light, showing one face, then another, and sometimes hiding both. In this dazzling anomaly, there was both poetry and terror. Poetry, because the cosmos once again showed us the beauty of the unknown. Terror, because light, our main tool of cognition, suddenly proved to be unreliable. When rays become enemies of the truth, all that remains is to surrender. Before us is a phenomenon that cannot be reduced to familiar formulas. 3I divided by Atlas is not just an object, it is a mirror in which even light becomes a secret. With each new day of observation, 3I divided by Atlas increasingly resembled a shadow of the past, a reminder of humanity's first encounter with an interstellar wanderer, the mysterious Oumuamua. When it sped through the solar system in 2017, its image became a symbol, a cigar-shaped or disc-like form, incomprehensible fluctuations in brightness, a strange acceleration without any signs of a tail. It departed, leaving behind a trail of disputes and books, articles and hypotheses. And now, just a few years later, a new body, again interstellar, again defying classification. Scientists, not yet recovered from the first trauma of the unknown, once again felt that feeling, as if the universe had decided to repeat the lesson, reminding them that its mysteries are not exhausted. Atlas was not an exact copy of Oumuamua. Its size was smaller, its trajectory different, its glow more chaotic, but there was something painfully similar about it. The same incomprehensible elusiveness, the same game with the laws of physics, the same mockery of our thirst for understanding. It was an echo, a resonance, the second strike of a bell that rings in such a way as to resonate in memory. Some astronomers stated directly, this is not a coincidence. They argued that if we see a second and third interstellar object in such a short period, it means there are far more of them in our galaxy than we thought. Perhaps the solar system is constantly permeated by such wanderers, but we have only now learned to notice them. But for others, Atlas became not so much a statistical fact as a symbol of a recurring mystery, as if the universe itself, like a teacher, was once again placing the same problem before us, only from a different angle. You didn't understand it the first time. Try again. And if Oumuamua gave rise to speculation about a possible artificial nature, then Atlas made these conjectures even more persistent, for coincidences are rarely so precise. Two objects, almost in a row, both eluding explanation, both carrying with them an echo of a different geometry, a different logic. The echo of Oumuamua resounded in every discussion of Atlas, and this echo was not just a reminder of the past, but a harbinger of the future. If wanderers are coming to us more and more often, then perhaps a series of revelations awaits us, or a series of questions we are not ready to answer. And in this repetition, there is a frightening thought. What if these are not random guests? What if they are signals? What if each of them is part of a story that we do not yet know how to read? When 3I divided by Atlas came into the view of global science, it was bombarded not only by the rays of telescopes, but also by a whirlwind of hypotheses. It seemed that every school of astronomy tried to claim it, fitting it into familiar categories, but the more versions that were voiced, the more obvious it became. The object eludes them all. The first wave of explanations was cautious. It's a comet. This is the easiest explanation, as comets are unpredictable. They break apart, evaporate, and create strange light curves. But Atlas showed no convincing signs of a tail, and its cometary nature remained just a hypothesis. Another group of scientists insisted it was an asteroid, a rocky body ejected from another system. But then why did its brightness fluctuate so chaotically? Why did its trajectory hint at additional forces? Rocky asteroids do not behave so capriciously. The third line of discussion was the loudest. It is a fragment. Perhaps Atlas was only part of a larger body that was destroyed in its home system. Its shape could be fractured, its surface jagged, which would explain the light anomalies. But calculations showed that this hypothesis also did not resolve all the questions. And then there were those who dared to consider the forbidden. What if it's artificial? They said quietly. After all, the strange geometry, the absence of a tail, the unusual trajectory, all of this is reminiscent of the possibility of a technological origin. Oumuamua had already generated such rumors, and now they were revived. The scientific community reacted sharply. Such ideas were considered too bold, too unsubstantiated, but their very popularity reflected a growing tension as the clash of hypotheses turned into chaos. Each theory was burned by the data, like a moth on glass. And in this chaos, there was its own drama. Scientists, accustomed to relying on strict formulas, suddenly found themselves in the position of philosophers, forced to discuss not only facts, but also interpretations. The object became an arena where not just hypotheses, but worldviews clashed. Too unpredictable for a comet, too bright for an asteroid, too mysterious for a simple fragment, Atlas was a challenge. And every hypothesis, even a rejected one, only strengthened its mythology. For the more versions there are, the deeper the shadow. And in this shadow, the main question was born. What if the truth lies not in any one of the hypotheses, but in the fact that they are all insufficient? As telescopes continued to track Atlas, their sensors recorded strange variations in light that could not be explained unequivocally. The photometric curves, usually serving as the signature of a celestial body, here looked as if someone had deliberately distorted their handwriting. The brightness fluctuations were too fast, too chaotic. Normally, they reflect the rotation of an object. The light intensifies when a reflective facet is turned towards Earth and weakens when the surface absorbs the rays. But Atlas had no clear periodicity. Its glow seemed to pulse like breath, unconnected to rotation. Some researchers tried to link this to the fragmentation hypothesis. They suggested the object was surrounded by a cloud of small debris, which created the illusion of a flickering body. But the data refuted this as well. The debris should have scattered the light softly, but here, sharp jumps were observed. The signals in the infrared range were particularly intriguing. Where stable thermal radiation was expected, the instruments recorded bursts, as if the surface was suddenly heating up or revealing hidden areas. It looked like a series of pulses, short but distinct. Scientific language called them anomalous fluctuations, but in the corridors, another word was heard: signals. It was unsettling, because a signal implies a source, and Atlas had none. Of course, no one seriously claimed that it was a message or a radio beacon, but the ambiguity remained, for the light fluctuations resembled a structure that seemed to indicate a pattern, but this pattern was elusive, remaining intangible. Ultimately, astronomers were divided into camps. Some believed these were simply observational defects, imperfections in the technology. Others insisted, the data is real, we just don't understand its nature yet. A third, more daring group whispered about a possible technological origin, that we are facing not a chaotic body, but an object hiding an internal organization. But no matter what they called these bursts, noise or signals, one fact remained. Atlas exhibited behavior that did not fit into a natural model. It shone and faded as if it chose what to show the observer. And in this glow without a source, a feeling was born that we are looking not just at a rock from another system, but at a phenomenon that refuses to be captured by light. The trajectory of 3, I divided by Atlas, should have been simple, like any hyperbola. Interstellar wanderers enter the solar system and leave, obeying the single law of gravity. Everything else is a variation on a theme. Angles of entry, speed, points of closest approach. But Atlas surprised again. Its path seemed to hint at external forces. Calculations showed deviations, tiny but persistent. If you were to plot the trajectory on a map and compare it with the calculated model, the lines would not match completely. They diverged like a shadow from an object. These discrepancies could not be explained by instrument errors. They were repeated in different datasets, regardless of the telescope or analysis method. Usually, such deviations are explained by the effect of outgassing from comets. Ice evaporates, creating invisible jets of gas that gently push the object, changing its course. But Atlas did not show the customary tail. No noticeable dust clouds, no long jets illuminated by the sunday, only a void, distorting the gravitational pattern. Some astronomers cautiously suggested that perhaps it had an unusual surface that evaporated unevenly, with brief bursts of gas emissions, but this version seemed too contrived, as if stretched. Others argued, we are underestimating microforces. Perhaps something is at work there that we do not yet know. It was here that the philosophy of science came into play. For humanity, gravity has always been the foundation. It explained the movement of planets, the birth of stars, the shape of galaxies, but Atlas, with its elusive flight, seemed to show your foundation is incomplete. One could dismiss it, say that it's a minor detail, that science will find an explanation. But history knows that it was small discrepancies in orbits that once led to the discovery of new planets, and later to the theory of relativity. In these deviations may lie a window into new laws, and Atlas left us just such a window, a gravitational deception, a hint of a force we do not yet know, or of a structure of the object that makes it move as if the laws are slightly bent. It flew past, leaving in the heavens not only a trail of light but also an intellectual challenge. Perhaps even gravity is not the final truth. Each new day of observing 3I divided by Atlas turned into a marathon for the researchers. Time was catastrophically short. Interstellar wanderers fly by too quickly. They appear suddenly and disappear, receding into the depths of space before humanity has a chance to get a proper look at them. And so, every moment, every photon became priceless. Astronomical centers from Hawaii to Europe, from South America to Australia, all tried to catch Atlas in the sights of their instruments. Observatory schedules were broken, night shifts were extended, and astronomers changed their usual projects to carve out another hour of observation. But along with enthusiasm, tension grew. Any new measurement was supposed to be the key to the puzzle, but it only added to the chaos. Every graph, every data table confirmed one thing. The object did not fit into conventional models. And it was this that exhausted the researchers. Meetings were held in a hurry. Some argued that Atlas was a disintegrated comet. Others claimed it was an asteroid with an anomalous reflective surface. Some hinted at the possibility of a fragment from a cloud of debris, but no single hypothesis explained everything at once. This inability to reach a unified conclusion gave rise not only to scientific disputes, but also to internal despair. People who had dedicated their lives to finding patterns suddenly found themselves captive to an object that seemed to mock their methods. In the corridors, they said, "We are facing the same thing as with Oumuamua. The cosmos does not give us enough time." And this feeling of pressure carried with it a philosophical pain, as if the universe itself was deliberately denying us knowledge, opening the door for just a moment and then slamming it shut. For some scientists, this became a stimulus to work more fiercely, to search for new methods of analysis. For others, it was a source of doubt, almost existential. What if we never know the truth? What if this mystery is fundamentally not for us? And yet, despite the fatigue and anxiety, the telescopes continued to watch. In their cold mirrors was reflected not only the light curve of Atlas, but also the tension of the observers themselves, because the pressure came not from colleagues, not from institutions, it came from the mystery itself. 3I divided by. Atlas not only tested the stability of our models, it tested the stability of our faith that the universe is accessible to understanding at all. Mathematics has always been the primary weapon of astronomy. Where the eye sees only dots on a dark canvas, equations draw trajectories, predict the future, and construct the symmetry of the world. But 3I divided by Atlas called into question even this power of numbers. When groups of scientists began to create models of its movement and behavior, the formulas unexpectedly ceased to be accurate mirrors of reality. Parameters that in other cases easily fell into neat rows, here were torn to pieces. In some calculations, Atlas looked like a comet, in others, an asteroid. Some algorithms showed a slow rotation, others a chaotic one. The main discrepancy concerned its brightness and mass. If you take the observed brightness as a basis, the object should have been relatively large. But if you consider its speed and assume density, the dimensions turned out to be much smaller. These equations did not align, as if Atlas simultaneously possessed two incompatible scales. For the first time in a long while, astronomers encountered a mathematical paradox in such a pure form. They were accustomed to noise and inaccuracies, but here the discrepancies were fundamental, and this created an unsettling feeling. Perhaps the object demonstrates properties that we do not yet understand. Some researchers spoke of an irregular shape that distorts the light curves. Others pointed to the possibility of a non-standard composition, a mixture of minerals and ice that behaves unexpectedly under solar radiation. But as soon as one hypothesis solved part of the equations, another part of them collapsed. The mathematics of Atlas resembled an attempt to solve a puzzle with missing pieces, and the more scientists tried to assemble it, the more evident it became. The pieces are deliberately hidden. Here, at the heart of science, a philosophical conclusion was born. Numbers are the language of the universe, but sometimes this language speaks in a whisper. Sometimes it deliberately distorts the word. And then mathematics turns not into a tool of power, but into a mirror of our powerlessness. 3I, divided by Atlas, became such a mirror. It showed that even where it seems formulas should explain everything, there remains a realm of the impossible. And in this impossibility of mathematics lies, perhaps, the most important message. The universe will always be greater than our equations. When it became clear that 3I, divided by Atlas, did not conform to simple models, scientists did what they always do in the search for truth. They turned their ears to the cosmos. Radio telescopes around the world were aimed at the wanderer to catch even the slightest whisper, the tiniest signal. The logic is simple. If the object is a comet or an asteroid, it should be silent, emitting only natural noise. But if it hides something else, if its nature is at least partly technological, one could hope for faint radio interference, for pulsations, for frequencies that cannot be explained by natural processes. They listened for a long time, nights and days. Spectra were scanned in real time, searching for peaks that could signify an intelligent origin, but the ether was silent. 3I divided by Atlas passed through the field of view of radio telescopes without leaving the slightest hint of a message. This silence was not just a given, it became a symbol, for in it was reflected not only the absence of a signal, but also the emptiness of hope. In the back of the minds of many scientists, a thought lingered. What if right now we hear the first interstellar voice? What if Atlas is a letter? But the cosmos answered with silence. Silence, however, is not equal to a lack of meaning. Sometimes, it is in silence that the deepest answer is hidden. Perhaps Atlas was a letter, but a letter in the form of a riddle that needs no radio waves. A letter that we must read in its behavior, in its elusive geometry, in its contradictions. And yet, this silence resonated painfully. It was a reminder that humanity always hopes for a miracle, but most often hears only its own echo. We listen to the universe, yearning for a voice, and in return, we receive the silence, the very same silence that makes the starry sky so bottomless. 3I divided by Atlas told us nothing, or it told us everything at once by remaining silent. Not a single image of 3I divided by Atlas ever showed its true silhouette. In photographs, there is only a blurry spot, surrounded by a halo of digital noise, with no outlines, no edges, no shadow from which one could reconstruct its form. It seems deliberately wrapped in a veil, hidden from the human gaze. Astronomers tried everything: adaptive optics, methods of computational reconstruction, combining hundreds of images, but the result remained the same: a fog, a clot of light, a spot that eludes analysis, as if the object itself were not a body, but a mirage. Usually, even the most distant comets allow for the calculation of basic characteristics, such as diameter, axis of rotation, and angular dimensions. But Atlas shattered this familiar practice. Its brightness had a life of its own, refusing to fit into models. Sometimes it seemed we were seeing an elongated figure, the next night a spherical one, then something torn, almost like a cloud. This effect created the feeling that Atlas has no real shape in the conventional sense, that its essence is changeable, fluid, as if it chooses what to be. Astronomers, of course, refused to accept such metaphors, but deep down, even the most rigorous researchers admitted the object behaves as if it is hiding its face. The scientific community was faced with a paradox. On one hand, they had data, hundreds of measurements. On the other, they provided no coherent picture. The shape remained nebulous, not because we are looking too poorly, but because there is something in the object itself that makes it immune to observation. And this gives rise to a philosophical question. Is it possible that in the cosmos, there exist bodies that are fundamentally inaccessible to visualization, objects whose essence is elusiveness? 3I, divided by Atlas, became a candidate for this new category: invisible forms. And that is why every image of Atlas resembled not a picture, but a mirror. In it were reflected not the lines of a celestial body, but the limits of our knowledge. And perhaps this was its true form, a form in the fog, always near and always unattainable. One of the most agonizing mysteries of 3I, divided by Atlas, was the discrepancy between its presumed size and its observed behavior. All calculations hit a paradox. The object appeared too bright for its mass and too light for its trajectory. Based on the light curves, Atlas should have been a large body, perhaps tens or hundreds of meters in diameter, but calculations of its density and gravitational interaction with the solar system indicated otherwise. It behaves as if it is much smaller, as if it is not a monolith at all, but a hollow shell, a cloud, or a structure devoid of conventional weight. Scientists tried to construct compromise models. Some suggested that the object's surface was covered with substances of high reflectivity, such as ice crystals or unusual minerals. Such a surface could make it appear brighter than it actually is. Others insisted on the debris hypothesis. Atlas is not a solid body, but a loose agglomeration that seems large but has low density. And yet, even these versions did not solve the entire puzzle, because the paradox remained. Too much light, too little mass, too great a visibility, too weak a reality. There have been similar situations in scientific history. Once, astronomers discovered anomalous movements of planets that were later explained by the existence of yet undiscovered bodies. But Atlas did not offer such a simple way out. Here, on the contrary, it seemed that the very matter of the object did not correspond to our expectations. Philosophers of science, in private conversations, spoke of a symbol: it is empty, yet visible. It exists, but it is as if it is not there. In these words, the image of Atlas was born as a reflection of the cosmos itself, in which emptiness is brighter than substance. The paradox of size turned out to be not just a technical problem, it became a metaphor. An object that flew through the solar system demonstrated that a combination of the incompatible is possible in the world: brightness without mass, shape without clear boundaries, movement without explanation. And it was in this paradox that a sense of terror and admiration was hidden simultaneously. For Atlas showed us that even such a simple parameter as size can turn into a philosophical abyss. Light is the astronomer's main ally. With its help, distances are measured, masses are calculated, and the chemical compositions of distant worlds are revealed. Every photon that reaches our instruments is evidence of something that happened somewhere in the bottomless dark. But in the case of 3I divided by Atlas, the ally became an enemy. All observations boiled down to a game of light and shadow, and this game was full of deception. In some spectra, the object looked like an icy body, in others, like a rocky asteroid. On some nights, it flared brighter than neighboring stars. On others, it almost dissolved as if refusing to exist. Light did not reveal its nature but concealed it, as if speaking to us in the language of illusions. The problem was compounded by the fact that the photometric curves of Atlas were inconsistent. Usually, changes in brightness reflect the rotation and shape of a body. But here, the light fluctuated chaotically, as if reflected not from a monolith, but from a multitude of moving facets. It seemed that each pulse of light came from a different, temporary form, as if the object itself was changing from moment to moment. Some researchers spoke of a dynamic albedo, a hypothetical ability of the Atlas surface to change its reflectivity in response to solar radiation. Others hinted at the presence of a cloud of microparticles that creates a mirage effect. But even these versions explained only a part of the phenomena. Thus, light, our reliable intermediary, turned into a deceiver. It gave false signals, led astray, and made us see what was not there. On photographs, hints of an elongated shape appeared, then a disc-like one, then a jagged one. None of them were confirmed. The philosophical paradox was that light itself, thanks to which we discovered the universe, became a barrier to knowledge here. It did not just fail to help, it hindered, as if the object itself used it to hide. 3. I, divided by Atlas, became a mirror, in which light showed its dual face, that of a guide and a deceiver. And this reminded humanity that knowledge always stands on the border between clarity and illusion. Perhaps this was the hidden lesson of the wanderer. Not everything that shines should be trusted. When conventional explanations exhausted themselves, hypotheses that were more like philosophical parables than strict equations came into play. 3I divided by Atlas seemed to push scientists beyond the limits of conventional science, to where the boundary with cosmological conjectures becomes blurred. Some researchers cautiously suggested, perhaps we have encountered an object from a different physical regime. What if Atlas is a messenger not only from another star system, but also from another phase of the universe? Perhaps its matter is subject to different conditions of formation than the asteroids and comets we are used to. Others reasoned more boldly. In the corridors, words like multiverse and anomalous origin were heard. If the universe is truly diverse and infinite, then why shouldn't it produce bodies whose composition and properties seem impossible to us? Atlas could turn out to be not just a wanderer, but proof that the cosmos is much broader than our conceptions of it. There were also theories that the object might be connected to dark matter, not literally consisting of it, but surrounded by a thin shell or interacting with invisible structures that alter its movement and optical properties. Such ideas remained on the verge of science fiction, but it was Atlas that made them permissible. Conventional explanations crumbled too quickly. A different version sounded in a philosophical key. Atlas is a challenge to the observer. Its incomprehensibility speaks not of the nature of the object, but of the limits of our instruments and theories. In this sense, it is not a celestial body, but an event of knowledge, a moment when the universe shows humanity there are areas that are not yet meant for understanding. Thus, science approached a dangerous line. It was too easy to slide into myth, into a beautiful story, instead of a rigorous model. But perhaps it is in these myths that the power of Atlas lies. It is not only an object for telescopes, but also a symbol of a multi-world, a reflection that beyond our horizon, there can always be something that does not obey our laws. And in this possibility of alternative universes, in this conjecture about the multiplicity of worlds, Atlas became a reminder. We are not spectators of a single play. We are accidental witnesses of an infinite theatre, and actors we did not expect can always appear on the stage. Each anomaly of 3I, divided by Atlas, gave rise to ghosts of ideas that hovered between rigorous science and bold conjectures. These phantom possibilities were not confirmed, but they clung to the imagination like mirages in a desert. One of them was the thought that Atlas might not be a natural object, but an artifact. Not necessarily a ship, not necessarily a message. Perhaps it is simply a remnant, a fragment of a structure created somewhere far away, sometime long ago. Its strange shape, low density, and unusual light fluctuations could all be explained by a technological origin. But this explanation is too frightening to be accepted without proof. Another possibility sounded even more subtle. Atlas could be a phantom in the literal sense of the word, an object partially existing in our dimension and partially beyond it. Such an idea seemed more like a metaphor than a hypothesis, but an intuition could be sensed in it. The observed behavior of Atlas is unlike the behavior of a familiar body, as if part of its essence is hidden in another layer of reality. inaccessible to our view. There were also more cautious options. Atlas is a window. That is, not an object in itself, but a sign that millions of similar bodies exist in the galaxy. Perhaps we have only begun to see the first of them, and each subsequent one will bring new anomalies. Then Atlas is not an exception, but a harbinger of the future. There was a strange beauty in these phantom possibilities, for they spoke not about the object itself, but about our imagination, about how the human mind strives to fill the void with meaning. Scientific articles cautiously spoke of anomalies, but behind this dry word, a whole chorus of ideas was hidden, translucent as dreams. And perhaps it is these phantoms that are the most valuable legacy of Atlas. For it did not leave a tail like a comet. It did not provide a clear shape like an asteroid, but it created a space of possibilities, phantom-like, fragile, yet burningly real for those who dared to imagine them. Atlas flew away, but its ghostly images remained in our consciousness, and each of them is a question without an answer, but with an infinite echo. And what if the story of 3I, divided by Atlas, became a rare moment when the very foundation of science came under pressure? The scientific method, a sequence of observations, verifications, and repetitions, requires clarity. It is built on the premise that a phenomenon can be described and reproduced, but Atlas evaded these rules like water slipping through fingers. There was data, a lot of it. Telescopes recorded light curves, orbital calculations, spectral measurements, but each new observation, instead of confirming the previous one, raised even more questions. Where the method demands repeatability, Atlas provided chaos. Where the method seeks patterns, it threw up exceptions. This created a painful paradox. Scientists felt they had a unique chance to touch an interstellar wanderer, but this chance did not yield to standard approaches. Model after model collapsed. Hypotheses in journals appeared and disappeared faster than they could take hold. Some researchers stated directly, "We are observing the limit of the method's applicability." The scientific method is designed for phenomena that can be studied long enough and in detail. But Atlas was fleeting. It flew by, leaving only fragments of data, as if deliberately mocking the principles of verification and repeatability. This situation was reminiscent of ancient times when people first looked at the sky without telescopes. Then, myth replaced formula, and belief replaced experiment. With Atlas, we found ourselves on that border again. Too much unknown, too little time, too shaky a foundation for rigorous conclusions. Within the scientific community, this sparked intense discussions. Some argued, "We must be honest, we know nothing." Others insisted, "We must at least hypothesize." A third group whispered, "If the method is failing, we need to look for new approaches." And in this crack between knowledge and ignorance, Atlas became a symbol of a challenge to the very foundation of science. It reminded us, the method is just a tool, not a guarantee. It is strong where the world allows for observation and repetition. But if the world reveals only a brief and distorted image, the method becomes helpless. Thus, 3I, divided by Atlas, exposed the vulnerability of science and, at the same time, showed its strength, the ability to recognize its own limits. For in the recognition of boundaries, it is not defeat that is born, but a new search. After the disappearance of 3I, divided by Atlas into the depths of space, the scientific community realized that waiting for chance encounters with interstellar wanderers means missing opportunities. Each new visit turns into a race against time, where telescopes barely manage to collect data, and then only regret remains. This pain pushed astronomers to an idea. Missions are needed, created specifically to chase after these aliens. Projects began to emerge on paper and in laboratories. One of them was the concept of Project Lyra, an ambitious idea to send a spacecraft in pursuit of interstellar objects. Initially, the project was conceived for Oumuamua, but after Atlas, it resonated with new force. The idea is simple, yet daring, to use gravitational maneuvers and powerful engines to catch up with a wanderer and examine it up close. Other missions were planned preventively. Scientists began to talk about a fleet of automated probes, ready for launch at any moment, as soon as the next interstellar object is detected. Such space hunters would wait in a dormant state and launch instantly to intercept the guest before it gets away. Projects for new generation telescopes were not far behind. Huge mirrors, infrared sensors, orbital stations. All of this was intended to allow us to see what Atlas had hidden. The push towards the infrared spectrum became particularly important. It is there that one can capture the heat of even those objects that play with light in the visible spectrum. But behind these technical plans, there was also a philosophy. Future missions are not only a matter of technology, but also a matter of will. Can humanity unite its resources for an encounter with those who appear for only a few months? Are we ready to invest billions in chasing shadows? 3I divided by Atlas became an argument in favor. It showed that random observations leave too many voids, and a void in knowledge is also a void in understanding our place in the universe. Therefore, future missions came to be seen as a necessity. They must not only chase and photograph, they must show that humanity is capable of extending a hand towards the cosmos, and, for once, holding on to a secret before it dissolves into infinity. After the story of 3I divided by Atlas and its elusive mystery, it became clear that humanity needs new tools not only for observation, but also for hunting. In scientific circles, this word, hunters, was heard more and more often, not in an aggressive sense, but in the meaning of readiness to intercept interstellar wanderers, not letting them slip away as had happened 3 times in a row. Designers began to talk about a network of space observatories that would not just record anomalous objects, but would instantly classify them and transmit their coordinates to automated interceptor probes. These probes would be kept in a standby mode in orbit, like arrows in a quiver, ready to launch within hours. In laboratories, propulsion systems capable of rapid acceleration were discussed. Ion thrusters, solar sails, even nuclear propulsion concepts. For interstellar wanderers move too fast to be caught by conventional means. To intercept them, we need spacecraft that will themselves be symbols of a new era of cosmonautics. Space hunters are not just about technology, they're also about a new philosophy of exploration. If before we were passive witnesses, dependent on chance discoveries, now we are talking about becoming active explorers, ready to go out to meet them. Such a shift changed the very paradigm, from random curiosity to a systematic strategy for finding interstellar messengers. In these conversations, Atlas became a symbol of loss. Scientists recalled how little data they managed to collect, how quickly the object disappeared, leaving only riddles behind. This experience was bitter, but it was precisely what spurred them to resolve. If another wanderer flies through the solar system, we must be ready. And although the technologies were still in their infancy, the image of the future already lived in the imagination. A fleet of fast probes heading towards interstellar shadows to prevent them from dissolving into non-existence. People called them hunters, but in reality, they were keepers of memory, machines created to one day give us our first real look at the mysterious bodies that came from beyond our world. 3I divided by Atlas made this dream a necessity. It reminded us that hunting for the secrets of the cosmos is not aggression, but a form of love for knowledge. When the data on 3I divided by Atlas began to circulate among research centers, a strange feeling arose in the scientific community. Not everything reaches the public. Reports appeared in open databases, but many details remained blurred, and some measurements disappeared from access altogether. And this silence was noticeable. Of course, in astronomy, it is not uncommon for information to go through long verification cycles. Scientists do not like to publish raw data, fearing errors and hasty conclusions. But in the case of Atlas, it looked different. Too much was closed off too quickly. Spectra that could have shed light on its composition were published with delays. Photometric curves were trimmed. Even the coordinates of some series of images remained inaccessible to the general public. Such behavior gave rise to speculation. Some said, it's all about caution, to not repeat the noise around Oumuamua, when conjectures about its alien origin quickly went beyond the bounds of science. Others whispered of something more alarming. Perhaps agencies and institutions are deliberately hiding data, fearing interpretations that are too bold. The topic of secrecy in space always provokes painful disputes. On one hand, the exploration of the heavens should be open, as it is the heritage of all humanity. On the other, politics and interests influence even the most distant horizons. If Atlas indeed showed properties that go beyond the familiar, perhaps someone decided that such information is too dangerous for open discussion. The philosophical subtext here is simple. Any silence leaves room for speculation, and the more secrets surrounding an object, the louder the question sounds. What exactly are they hiding? Atlas became not only a scientific mystery, but also a political mirror. In it were reflected the fears of institutions, the fear of losing control over interpretation, the fear of panic, the fear of admitting that we have encountered something truly new. And this silence was no quieter than the universe itself. It became part of the myth of 3I divided by Atlas, a silence in which, perhaps, is hidden no less a mystery than in its vanishing silhouette. Around interstellar wanderers, there is always an aura of romanticism, but behind it, politics inevitably lurks. The story of 3I divided by Atlas showed that even celestial bodies become part of earthly games. Scientific agencies from different countries collected data on the object, but shared it reluctantly. The USA, Europe, Russia, China, each side saw in Atlas not only a subject of research, but also a strategic resource. For if interstellar wanderers carry unique materials or clues about other systems, their study could have significance far beyond science. Political analysts cautiously hinted, if one country is the first to learn how to effectively intercept such objects, it will gain a monopoly on access to interstellar resources, and in the future, to possible technologies hidden in these bodies. Even the mere possibility of an artificial origin turned Atlas into a potential object of national security. In the corridors, ideas were discussed that the data was being deliberately filtered to avoid leaks. Perhaps some spectra or trajectories did contain inconvenient details that were better kept behind closed doors. After all, acknowledging the inexplicable is not only a challenge for science but also a risk for politics. The mass imagination reacts too sharply to such mysteries. Thus, Atlas turned out to be not just an interstellar body, but an arena for rivalry. It became an invisible diplomatic player whose existence raised questions about who owns space and who has the right to possess knowledge about it. The philosophy of the heavens clashed with the practice of earthly power. For humanity, space is a common abyss, but for states, it is a resource, a threat, a sphere of influence. And Atlas, with its silence and elusive form, only intensified these tensions. In the end, a troubling thought arose. Perhaps the true secret of 3I divided by Atlas is not in its geometry, but in how people deal with the unknown. For sometimes we hide, not out of fear of the cosmos, but out of fear of ourselves. 3I divided by Atlas departed, leaving behind only fragmented light curves and awkward models. But it was in this remnant, in the emptiness of the data, that a special meaning was born, because the question of its shape turned out to be deeper than just an astronomical task. It turned into a mirror, reflecting the limits of human cognition. Philosophers said, the invisible is not just what is hidden from the eye. The invisible is that which resists interpretation. It exists on the boundary where knowledge ceases to be certainty and turns into conjecture. And Atlas became the embodiment of this boundary. Its invisible form is a reminder that the world cannot be reduced to pictures and models. The universe is capable of creating phenomena that remain shadows even in the era of giant telescopes and supercomputers. And this humility is perhaps the most important lesson of Atlas. For some scientists, it became a symbol of technical limitation. We have not yet created the tools to capture the truth. For others, it was a metaphysical symbol. There exist things that are fundamentally not given to our sight. As in mystical traditions, where the divine manifests through the hidden, so here, the universe revealed itself not through an answer, but through silence. That is precisely why the mystery of Atlas's shape is more disturbing than any of its other anomalies. For if its movement can be attributed to gases, if its light to reflection, then the absence of shape cannot be attributed to anything. It is a phenomenon in itself. A shape that cannot be seen is a challenge to the very idea of science as a visual act. Perhaps the invisible is its message. The cosmos shows us not a body, but an absence. Not an outline, but a void. And this void becomes filled with meaning. It forces us to ask again what it means to see. The philosophy of the invisible is not a rejection of knowledge. It is the recognition that knowledge will always be surrounded by shadow. And 3I divided by Atlas became its emblem, an interstellar symbol that a secret is also a form of existence. 3I divided by Atlas disappeared beyond our sight, but it left us face to face with what can be called the abyss of the unknowable. For science, it was an object. For humanity, a reflection of its own fragility. In every discussion of Atlas, a question was voiced that is rarely spoken aloud. Is humanity ready for knowledge that might be too great? We seek clarity, but sometimes clarity is more frightening than darkness. If we could have seen its form, and it turned out to be alien, technological, artificial, would it not have shaken our conception of the world? Atlas of myth was a Titan guardian, holding the heavens on his shoulders. The interstellar Atlas turned out to be a mirror. It did not hold up the heavens, it held up our anxiety. Its silence, its misty form, its deceptive light. All this turned us into heroes of an ancient drama where man looks into the cosmos and sees himself. And this self is not always comforting. In Atlas, we saw our own fear of the void, of the fact that the universe is not obliged to be understandable. We saw our own striving for meaning that eludes us. We saw that the thirst for knowledge itself is capable of creating an abyss if the answers do not come. For philosophers, this encounter became an example of an existential challenge. For poets, a new metaphor for darkness. For scientists, a reminder that every experiment can lead not to clarity, but to an even greater mystery. But perhaps this is where its true value lies. 3i divided by Atlas gave us not knowledge, it gave us a mirror. And in this mirror, we saw that humanity is still walking on the edge between the light of reason and the shadow of the unknown, between the desire to comprehend and humility before a mystery. The abyss did not destroy us, but it made us pause. And perhaps this is exactly what we needed to feel, that we are still small, still searching, still capable of wonder and fear. The observations of 3i divided by Atlas ended as abruptly as they had begun. Telescopes still tried to squeeze the last crumbs of light from the departing object, but it gradually faded into the depths of space, becoming fainter, more blurred, until it turned into a dot, one among billions. Scientists spoke of this almost with sadness, as if saying farewell. The last look is always special. It carries not so much data as a sense of loss. For each interstellar wanderer is not just an object, it is an opportunity. And when an opportunity disappears, an emptiness remains that presses harder than any formula. The photometric curves of the final weeks showed only one thing. Nothing had changed. Atlas departed as mysterious as it had arrived. No new clues, no final flashes, only a diminishing glow dissolving into the night. This moment was reminiscent of the departure of Oumuamua, but back then, for the first time, there was hope that next time we would manage more. Now, after Atlas, there was a feeling that even if we succeed, the mystery might be fundamentally elusive, that we will always be looking but never seeing. And yet, it was the last look that made its presence real. Not a theory, not a hypothesis, but the simple fact that somewhere in the darkness, a body from another star system flew by, and our eyes, however briefly, met with it. Astronomers closed their observation programs, archived the data, and prepared articles. But what remained deepest in memory was not the analysis, but the image, a receding point disappearing over the horizon. The last look is not the end, it is a promise. For if we have seen an interstellar wanderer once, it means we will see one again. And for now, the memory remains of how the cosmos opened a door, and then immediately slammed it shut. 3i divided by Atlas disappeared, but its shadow remained. And perhaps this is its greatest lesson. Mysteries exist not to be solved, but to remind us of infinity. When 3i divided by Atlas finally moved out of the field of view of the telescopes, it ceased to be an object of science in the strict sense. It became an image, a symbol, a mirror. Its physical body dissolved in space, but its shadow remained in memory, as a sign of an eternal mystery. Scientists continued to argue about its nature, a comet, an asteroid, a fragment, or something more. But the longer the discussions dragged on, the clearer it became. The answers are not of decisive importance. What matters is not what it was, but what it showed us about ourselves. The mirror of eternity, that is what the Atlas effect can be called. It became a reflection of how humanity seeks meaning in the unknown. We strive to measure shape, mass, trajectory, but behind these numbers lies a much more ancient impulse, the thirst to see ourselves in infinity. Atlas did not reveal its essence, but perhaps that was its mission. It left us with a void that cannot be filled with formulas. And a void is always an invitation. An invitation to new observations, to new missions, to new philosophical quests. In this sense, it is akin to ancient myths, like Proteus, who changed his appearance and eluded those who tried to capture him. Atlas showed that truth can be fluid. It is not always given in a finished form. Sometimes it lies in the very impossibility of grasping it. And that is why Atlas is not just an interstellar wanderer. It is a lesson about boundaries and infinity. A lesson that science and myth are not enemies, but two paths to the same horizon. The mirror of eternity remained hanging in the sky, not as a point, but as a memory. And as long as we look into space, we will remember that there are mysteries that do not disappear, even when the object has long gone beyond our sight. 3I, divided by Atlas, became one of those mirrors. It did not give us a form, but it gave us eternity. 3I, divided by Atlas, was just a tiny body that flew through the solar system in the spring of 2020. Its mass, its size, its composition, all of this remains conjecture, but its significance extends far beyond science. It became a symbol that the universe is always greater than our instruments, a symbol that in the age of giant telescopes and quantum computers, we are still capable of encountering a mystery that defies explanation, a symbol that knowledge does not cancel myth, but only deepens it. Perhaps in decades or centuries, we will have spacecraft capable of meeting interstellar wanderers and studying them up close. Perhaps one day we will learn what Atlas was hiding, a rock or something else, but until then, it will remain a legend. A legend of how the cosmos once again showed us its power to elude, a legend of how one small object reminded humanity of infinity, a legend that sometimes the question itself is more important than the answer. And when we next raise our eyes to the sky, we will know that somewhere out there, in the depths, similar wanderers are flying. They are the mirrors of eternity, in which not so much their mystery is reflected, but our own.